Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most heartbreaking yet heroic stories of World War II, Operation Market Garden. The Allies called it a bridge too far. The men who fought it sometimes just called it hell. This was victory snatched at a terrible, terrible price. September 1944, Europe had been at war for 5 long years. D-Day had happened 3 months earlier. Paris was liberated, and the Germans looked like they were on the ropes. Allied commanders were drunk on optimism. General Bernard Montgomery, the British hero of El Alamein, came up with a daring plan. Drop 3 entire airborne divisions behind enemy lines in Holland, seize a string of bridges, and punch a narrow corridor straight into Germany's industrial heartland. The Ruhr. If it worked, the war could be over by Christmas. The operation was given the code name Market Garden. Market was the airborne part, the biggest drop in history. Garden was the ground relief force, led by the British XXX Corps, that had to race 70 miles up a single highway to link up with the paratroopers before the Germans woke up and counter-attacked. On Sunday, September 17, 1944, the sky over England turned black with aircraft. Over 20,000 paratroopers from the American 82nd and 101st Airborne, the British 1st Airborne, and the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade jumped or landed in gliders. Crowds of Dutch civilians waved and cheered, throwing flowers, convinced liberation had finally come. But almost everything that could go wrong did go wrong from the start. Intelligence had warned that 2 battered, but refitting SS Panzer divisions were resting near the drop zones. Those warnings were dismissed as exaggerated. Radios didn't work in the Dutch countryside. The single road XXX Corps had to use could be blocked by one blown bridge or a single 88mm gun, and the weather-thick fog over England delayed the follow-up drops for days, meaning the men on the ground were left hanging with almost no supplies. The American 101st and 82nd did their job brilliantly, grabbing most of their bridges, but up at the far end, the British 1st Airborne had the toughest objective of all, the road bridge over the Lower Rhine at Arnhem. If that bridge fell into German hands, the whole plan collapsed. The British 1st Airborne Division, about 10,000 strong, dropped around the small Dutch city of Arnhem on that sunny Sunday afternoon. Their commander, Major General Roy Urquhart, had one simple order: take and hold the giant road bridge over the Rhine until XXX Corps arrived in 2, maybe 3 days. The plan looked good on paper. A coup de main force under Lieutenant Colonel John Frost was supposed to rush the north end of the bridge in jeeps and on foot the moment they landed. The rest of the division would dig in around the nearby town of Oosterbeek and wait for relief. But the drop zones were 8 miles west of the bridge, too far for surprise. German anti-aircraft guns were already firing before the last parachute opened. Worse, the Germans reacted with terrifying speed. The 2 SS Panzer divisions, everyone said, were burnt out, turned out to have hundreds of tanks, half-tracks, and battle-hardened veterans who knew exactly what the Allies were trying to do. Frost's battalion, only about 740 men, made it to the bridge in a running firefight through the suburbs. They reached the north ramp just as the sun was setting. German engineers tried to blow the bridge in their faces, but the charges failed. Frost's men barricaded themselves in the houses overlooking the span and waited for the rest of the division to fight through. They waited a long time. The other battalions ran into a wall of fire. German armored cars, self-propelled guns, even a few King Tiger tanks started rolling in from every direction. Radios failed. Ammunition ran low. By nightfall on the first day, it was clear the British were not going to get another battalion to the bridge. Frost and his 740 men were completely alone. Back in England, Montgomery's headquarters still believed everything was broadly on schedule. They had no idea the corridor was already starting to choke. Down on the single raised highway, the British called Hell's Highway, XXX Corps finally kicked off at 2:35 p.m. that Sunday. Irish Guards tanks rolled north in a thunder of engines, crowds cheering from the sidewalks. The first 20 miles went smooth. Then a single German 88 hidden in a beet field knocked out the lead tanks. Traffic jammed for miles. Every bridge became a bloodbath. Up at Arnhem, Frost's men held the northern end of the bridge through the night, listening to German boots marching across the roadway above them, unable to stop the enemy from reinforcing the southern bank. Monday morning broke cold and clear. The battle for the bridge was about to become legend. Monday, September 18th. Dawn over Arnhem. The men of Frost's 2nd Parachute Battalion woke to the sound of German armor revving up on the south bank. They had spent the night in shattered houses, sipping rainwater from gutters, sharing the last cigarettes, and listening to the enemy build up strength right across the river. By now, the Germans knew exactly how few British troops were actually holding the north end. General Wilhelm Bittrich, commander of 2 SS Panzer Corps, gave the order, wipe them out. King Tigers, Panzer IVs, and Sturmgeschütze assault guns. Even a captured French fire engine converted into a flamethrower. Everything rolled toward the bridge. Frost's men had almost no anti-tank weapons left. Their Piat's little spring-launched bombs could barely scratch a Tiger. Still, they fought room by room, floor by floor. Snipers in the attics picked off German officers. Engineers blew the approaches with gammon grenades. Medics worked in basements lit by burning furniture. Across the corridor, the American 82nd Airborne was locked in a brutal fight for the Nijmegen bridges. If they failed, the whole relief column died. At p.m. on the 20th, after days of house-to-house combat, U.S. paratroopers and guards tanks, finally, stormed across the Wall River in flimsy canvas boats under murderous fire. It was one of the bravest river assaults of the war, but it came 48 hours too late for the men at Arnhem. Back at the bridge, Tuesday turned into Wednesday. Frost was wounded in the legs, but kept directing fire from a cellar. Ammunition was down to handfuls. Water was gone. The houses were burning so fiercely the paint blistered off the Bren guns. German loudspeakers offered surrender terms. The British answered with insults and gunfire. On Thursday morning, September 21 Street, the end came fast. German Tiger tanks simply drove straight onto the bridge ramp, blasting point blank into the British positions. Frost was captured in the rubble of a schoolhouse. Only about 150 of his original 740 men walked out alive. Many badly burned. The bridge was lost. The road to the Ruhr was closed. In Oosterbeek, the rest of the 1st Airborne, now down to brigade strength, formed a tightening pocket the Germans called the Cauldron. They were surrounded, out of food, out of hope, but still fighting. By Wednesday, September 20th, the British 1st Airborne had been reduced to a few thousand exhausted, wounded, starving men, clinging to a shrinking horseshoe pocket around the village of Oosterbeek. The Germans nicknamed it Der Hexenkessel, the Witch's Cauldron. It was accurate. The perimeter was now barely 2 miles across. Every house was a strong point, every garden a graveyard. Ammunition was counted in single rounds. Men fought with bayonets, bricks, even sharpened entrenching tools. The regimental aid posts in the hotels along the Rhine were so full that surgeons operated on ironing boards and hallways while shells shook the walls. Supplies were supposed to come by air. RAF and USAF transports flew in low through a sky thick with flak. Most drops landed outside the pocket, straight into German hands. Paratroopers watched jeeps, radios, and crates of ammunition float down under red and green parachutes, then heard German cheers as they seized them. On the 21 Street, the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade finally jumped, but fog in England and murderous anti-aircraft fire over the drop zone turned it into a nightmare. Hundreds of Poles came down miles off target or were shot before they hit the ground. Only about 750 made it into the pocket, bringing a few tons of ammo and a lot of raw courage. The Germans attacked from every side at once. SS Panzer Grenadiers, Fallschirmjäger, even Kriegsmarine sailors thrown into the fight. Tigers and self-propelled guns fired point-blank into houses. Flamethrower teams worked street by street. Tree bursts from 88s shredded the woods where men tried to sleep. Yet the pocket held. Snipers with one bullet left still picked off tank commanders. A lone Vickers machine gun crew kept firing until the barrel glowed cherry red. Padre led services in basements while mortar bombs rained overhead. General Urquhart, who had been cut off for days, finally slipped back into the pocket, disguised in a private's blanket. He took one look at his division, now less than half strength, and radioed Allied headquarters a single bleak message: situation critical. Ammunition almost gone. Men physically exhausted. Eisenhower and Montgomery finally accepted the truth. The relief column was still miles away, bogged down at every canal and crossroads. Arnhem could not be saved. That night, under a full moon, the decision was made to pull the survivors out across the Rhine. Operation Berlin. The evacuation would begin in 48 hours. The nights of September 24th and 25th, 1944, were cold, wet, and deafening. Inside the Oosterbeek pocket, the 1st Airborne was down to its last few hundred able-bodied men. The wounded lay too deep in cellars. Many begged to be left behind so they wouldn't slow the escape. The Germans kept up a rolling barrage, convinced the British were finished. At divisional headquarters in the Hartenstein Hotel, Roy Urquhart made the hardest call of his life: evacuate across the Rhine before the pocket was completely crushed. The plan was simple on paper, insane in reality. Under cover of darkness and the worst storm in years, the survivors would slip south through the German lines, wade the 400-yard-wide river, and pray Canadian engineers could ferry them over in small boats. Operation Berlin kicked off at p.m. on the 25th. A massive artillery barrage from XXX corps on the South Bank opened up. The first time the trapped men had heard friendly guns in 9 days. It was the signal. Guides with white tape on their backs led silent columns through the pouring rain. Men carried the wounded on doors torn from houses. Others helped comrades with no boots left, feet wrapped in rags. They moved like ghosts, Sten guns ready, bayonets fixed, past burning buildings and fresh craters. At the riverbank, the scene was chaos. German machine guns swept the water. Tracers stitched red lines across the Black Rhine. Storm boats coughed to life. Each meant for 16 men, but packed with 30. Some capsized instantly. Others made it halfway before mortar rounds flipped them. Men swam with broken arms, holding rifles above their heads. A few clung to floating doors and ammunition boxes. On the South Bank, Canadian and British engineers stood waist-deep in freezing water, hauling soldiers aboard. One engineer, sapper Eric Cullingford, stayed at his boat for 12 straight hours until he collapsed from exhaustion. By dawn it was over. Only 2,398 men of the original 10,000 made it across. Another 300 Poles came out the next night. The rest, over 6,400, were dead, wounded, or marching into captivity. The Germans were stunned. So many had escaped under their noses. As the last boat pushed off, the remnants of the 1st Airborne sang "Abide with Me" softly into the rain. Then they disappeared into the mist. The morning of September 26th broke gray and quiet over the south bank of the Rhine. The men who had made it out of the Oosterbeek pocket looked like scarecrows, faces black with mud and gunpowder, eyes hollow, uniforms in tatters. Some had no helmets, no weapons, no boots. Many just sat in socks or barefoot. They sat in the dripping orchards around Driel, smoking borrowed cigarettes, staring at nothing. Of the proud 1st Airborne Division that had flown out of England 9 days earlier, only 1 man in 4 had come back. The 10,000 who jumped or landed in gliders were, now, 2,400 walking ghosts, plus a few hundred Poles. The rest lay under the Dutch soil, or were already on trains heading to POW camps in Germany. Casualty figures told the story better than words. British airborne losses: 1,485 killed, 6,414 captured or missing. The Americans lost another 3,500 along the corridor. XXX corps and supporting units took thousands more. Total Allied casualties for Market Garden topped 17,000, more than the Normandy invasion itself in just 9 days. The Dutch paid an even heavier price. German reprisals were brutal. Arnhem was almost completely destroyed. 450 civilians dead. The city center burned out. Tens of thousands were forcibly evacuated in the hunger winter that followed. Food that could have gone to the starving Dutch was instead used to feed the German army. Montgomery called it 90% successful in his official dispatch. The men who survived called it something else. One private, when asked by a war correspondent how the operation went, just pointed at the river and said, "There's your answer, mate. It's full of red berets." Back in Britain, the news hit like a punch in the gut. The same newspapers that had screamed "On to Berlin" a week earlier now ran black-bordered pages. The king sent a personal message of admiration. Churchill told Parliament the airborne troops had written a glorious page in our military annals. But the hard truth remained. The war would drag on through another freezing winter and into a bloody spring. Yet something unbreakable had been forged at Arnhem. The Dutch never forgot. Every year on the anniversary, school children still lay flowers at the graves and the rebuilt bridge, now renamed John Frost Bridge. Veterans returned until there were none left, always welcomed like sons. Every September, the people of Arnhem and Oosterbeek stop whatever they're doing at exactly p.m. and stand still for 2 minutes of silence. Church bells ring, traffic stops, then hundreds of children, some no older than 10, walk in perfect lines through the streets, carrying lanterns, singing the same songs their grandparents sang when the sky was full of parachutes. They call it the Airborne March, and more than 35,000 Dutch citizens still walk the old perimeter every year to say thank you to boys who never came home. The veterans kept coming back too, as long as they could. Year after year, smaller groups, older men, some in wheelchairs, some helped by nurses, until the last one crossed the river for the final time. In 2019, the final 3 British veterans returned. One of them, 98-year-old Fred Glover, laid a wreath and whispered, "We're sorry we couldn't do more." A little Dutch girl hugged him and said, "You gave us everything." The cemeteries are immaculate. Row on row of white Portland stone at Oosterbeek Airborne Cemetery, 1,764 graves, most of them 20-year-olds who will never grow old. On every headstone is the Pegasus emblem and a personal line chosen by families. "Greater love hath no man. He died that we might live free. Sleep on, beloved son." Every year the Dutch adopt those graves. Families bring flowers on birthdays the boys never reached. School classes rake the leaves in autumn. The groundsmen say they've never once had to cut the grass around the polish section, because polish visitors always do it by hand, on their knees. The bridge itself is now officially the John Frost Bridge. On the north ramp there's a simple plaque, 1725 September 1944. To the people of Arnhem, who suffered so much, and to the soldiers who tried to help them. That's the operation failed is history. That the men succeeded in something far bigger is legend. They proved that even when every plan collapses, even when the radios die and the ammo runs out, even when the river is 400 yards of freezing death, courage is still a force stronger than tanks. Arnhem wasn't the end of the war, but it was the moment the free world remembered why the war had to be fought at all. So here's to the 1st Airborne, to Frost 740 at the bridge, to the boys who held the cauldron, to the ones who never came back across the Rhine. And that's the full story of Operation Market Garden. 9 days in September that changed countless lives forever. 17,000 Allied casualties. 1 city reduced to ashes. A daring plan that fell agonizingly short. And yet, somehow, a moral victory that still shines brighter than any battlefield success. The men of the 1st Airborne, the 101st, the 82nd, the Poles, the tankers of XXX Corps, and the Dutch underground didn't just fight for bridges. They fought for the idea that ordinary people, when pushed to the wall, can still choose to stand up, look evil in the eye, and say, "Not here, not today." That spirit is why, 80 years later, strangers in the Netherlands still stop British tourists on the street, just to shake their hand and say, "Thank you." It's why the airborne flag still flies over Arnhem every September. It's why grown men cry the first time they walk across the John Frost Bridge and see school kids waving from the sidewalk. If you ever get the chance, go there yourself. Walk the drop zones at Ginkle Heath when the heather is purple. Stand on the north ramp where Frost's men made their last stand. Visit the cemetery at sunset when the bugler plays the last post, and the only sound after the final note is the wind in the pines. You'll feel it. The same thing every veteran felt when they went back. The dead aren't really gone. They're still holding the line. Thank you for watching this series with me. This one hurt to research, and I know it hurt to watch. But some stories are too important to stay quiet. If this moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to remember, and drop a red beret emoji in the comments for the boys who never came home. Next week, we're back to something lighter, I promise. Until then, take care of each other. This video was written and narrated by me, historical consulting from the Airborne Museum, Hartenstein and Cornelius, Ryan's A Bridge Too Far, and the veteran's own words. All footage and photos used under fair use for education. Special thanks to the people of Arnhem for keeping the flame alive. A lot of people think Market Garden just ended in failure and silence. It didn't. The ripple effects changed the rest of the war in ways no one saw coming. First, the Germans were shocked at how close the Allies had come. Hitler became convinced the next blow would fall in the north. So he kept 15 of his best divisions tied down in Holland right through the winter. Divisions he desperately needed when the Battle of the Bulge kicked off in December. Some historians argue that Arnhem's defeat actually helped shorten the war by months. Second, the airborne forces learned brutal lessons that saved thousands of lives later. When the 17th Airborne and 101st jumped across the Rhine in March 1945, Operation Varsity, planners used bigger drop zones, better radios, double supply drops, and massive pre-landing bombardments. Casualties were a fraction of Market Garden's. Arnhem's blood bought that success. Third, the Dutch hunger winter of 1944–45 killed 20,000 civilians. But the memory of Allied sacrifice galvanized the resistance. When liberation finally came in May 1945, Canadian troops rolling into Arnhem were met with scenes that rivaled Paris: flowers, kisses, tears. The bond forged in September's fire has never broken. One last quiet footnote. In 1947, the Dutch government offered every surviving member of the 1st Airborne honorary Dutch citizenship, most accepted. To this day, if you're a British veteran of a certain age and your passport says place of birth Arnhem, the immigration officer will look up, smile, and wave you through without a word. And the bridge? In 1977, when they rebuilt it after the war, the city council voted unanimously to name it after a British lieutenant colonel who held the original with 740 men against 2 panzer divisions. On the opening day, Queen Juliana and Prince Bernhard stood on the new span while a single Dakota flew overhead and a formation of Dutch schoolchildren in red berets saluted. John Frost, by then a frail old man, just stood there crying. He turned to the mayor and said, "I think we did all right after all." "Yeah, Colonel, you did more than all right. You gave the world a story that proves courage isn't measured in miles of ground won. It's measured in how long you're willing to stand when every sensible voice says run." So here we are, 10 parts later, 6,000 words, and I still feel like I've only scratched the surface. If this series did anything, I hope it did this. It turned names on a memorial into real young men who laughed, smoked too much, wrote letters home they never mailed, and then stood up when the world needed them to. That's all any of us can ever do. Stand up when it's our turn. If you watched every part, thank you. Seriously, you just gave almost an hour and a half of your life to remembering kids who gave everything. That matters more than you know. Here's what I need you to do now. 3 small things. Drop a simple or red beret emoji in the comments. Let's flood the section so the algorithm knows this story still moves people in 2025. Share one part, any part, with someone who's never heard the full story. A dad, a grandpa, teenager who thinks history is boring. Just one share keeps the flame alive for another year. If you're ever in Europe with a free weekend, book the flight to Arnhem. Stay at the Hartenstein, it's a museum now. Walk the perimeter at dusk. Buy a beer for whichever old Dutch guy starts talking to you. Because he will, and he'll probably cry when he finds out why you came. Tell him the boys are still remembered across the ocean. That's it. The 1st Airborne Division no longer exists. It was disbanded in 1945 because there simply weren't enough men left to fill the ranks. But every September, when those lanterns light up the streets of Oosterbeek and 35,000 Dutch voices sing, "Bide with me under the same trees where the guns once roared," the division reforms for one night. And for those few hours, every Red Beret that never came home is marching again. See you in the comments, lads. We will remember them. There's one moment from Arnhem that never made the history books, but every veteran who was there swore it happened. On the night of the evacuation, September 25th, the rain was coming down in sheets. The last boat had just pushed off from the north bank, packed with wounded men wrapped in blankets. A young private, no more than 19, was lying in the bottom of the boat with both legs shattered. He kept trying to sit up, muttering the same thing over and over. A Canadian engineer rowing the boat finally leaned down and asked, "What is it, mate? What do you need?" The kid looked up through the rain and said, "Clear as day. Tell my mom I was brave." Then he passed out. The engineer, a guy named George Pariser from Toronto, never forgot it. 50 years later, in 1994, he went back to Arnhem for the anniversary. He was 73, walking with a cane, and he still carried the kid's name in his wallet on a scrap of paper. Private Tommy Atkins, 1st Para. Kier 25 Sept 1944. George spent 3 days asking every Dutch guide, every museum volunteer, every old lady selling flowers, "Do you know what happened to Tommy Atkins' mum?" On the last day, an elderly woman overheard him in the cemetery. She walked up, took his hand, and said in perfect English, "I am Tommy's mum. I moved here after the war. I've been waiting 50 years for someone to bring me that message." She was 89. George was 73. They sat on a bench by her son's grave and cried until the sun went down. George told the story once to a local reporter, then never spoke of it again. He died the next year. The lady, Mrs. Atkins, lived to 104. Every single day until she passed, she put fresh flowers on Tommy's grave and on the grave of an unknown Canadian soldier buried 2 rows over. She said George had given her the only thing she ever wanted, proof that her boy hadn't been afraid at the end. So yeah, that really happened. And if anyone ever tells you wars are only about strategy and territory and politics, you tell them about a 19-year-old kid in a leaking boat on a freezing river, using his last conscious breath to make sure his mom knew he'd been brave. I promised myself this would be the final part, because some stories need to end with silence, not more words. But one last thing has to be said, out loud, for the men who can't say it anymore. Every veteran I ever met from Arnhem, British, Polish, American, Canadian, had the same haunted look when you asked them the question everyone asks. Was it worth it? They never answered right away. They'd light another cigarette, stare at the floor, and finally say something like, "We thought we were going to end the war. Instead, we just bought you another Christmas. That's all." But if the price of your freedom was 9 days of our lives and a few thousand of our mates, then, yeah, it was worth it. That's the part that breaks me every single time. They never saw themselves as tragic heroes. They saw themselves as the down payment on every peaceful morning you and I have ever woken up to since 1945. Every time you kiss your kid goodnight without hearing air raid sirens. Every time you argue about stupid stuff on the internet instead of hiding in a cellar. Every time you cross a bridge without wondering if someone's going to blow it up today. That's what they bought, with frostbitten feet, empty magazines, and the last heartbeat they had left. So here's the real ending. There is no moving on from Arnhem. There is only carrying it forward. Carry it in the way you treat strangers. Carry it when you vote. Carry it When somebody tells you courage is dead, or that the world isn't worth fighting for anymore, because 1760 for 20-year-olds under Dutch soil would like a word with that person. They prove the world is always worth one more stand. So stand. When it's hard, when it's unfair, when nobody's watching, when the smart move is to walk away. Remember a bunch of kids in red berets who could have surrendered any of the 9 days and didn't. Do it for them. And when your time comes, whatever river you have to cross, I hope you hear faint voices on the wind, young voices, laughing, singing, calling you home.